I'm convinced that Kenya will continue demonstrating that results and transformation are possible. And I call upon all of you to redouble the efforts to invest at scale in those critical interventions that will unlock benefits across the goals, to make bold choices and to take decisive action and leave no one behind in the pursuit of our better future. I wish us all a really fruitful meeting, and I look forward to working with you to translate today's enthusiasm into tomorrow's SDG achievements. Once again, Your Excellency, thank you for having me today.
Madam Deputy Secretary General, thank you very much. We know that you kind of stopped a lot of your other events to join this, and the importance that you give to Kenya for that, we don't take that for granted. And thank you very, very much for doing that. What we need to now be doing is, how do we work together as a UN family to make sure that the government's aspiration, not just in this COVID environment, but the post-COVID recovery, this is where we've been working very closely with the government to make sure that we actually, the entire socio-economic recovery plan that you and the Secretary General has asked us to do has actually come to fruition. And now if we are looking at what the different forms of investments we will start to make in this. And I think, as you correctly pointed out, the Big Four development agenda actually gives us an excellent recipe to accelerate, leapfrog, and make sure that we are able to use the energy, the political will that the country represents, the public policies that are in place, and quite clearly the very unorthodox partnerships that have now been cultivated can lead to those kind of results. In fact, I feel quite confident, Madam Deputy Secretary General, that Kenya could perhaps be that blueprint in this whole post-COVID recovery. But not just that. If we just look at the ecosystem of the countries here of Kenya, Ethiopia, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, Sudan, we will be 700 million people by 2050. With a few macroeconomic adjustments, we expect to see the population of the GDP growth actually go into double-digit growth. What is it that we could do for the young people? And this is where President Kenyatta's role, which you quite pointed out, has been so crucial in really inspiring and moving the youth agenda forward. It becomes absolutely mission critical. I know that the President is on a phone call. Patrick has just sent me a message. So I just want to check if CS Muchiru, we will stand by before we ask Cabinet Secretary Muchiru, who's here with us at the moment, the Minister for ICT, Youth and Innovation, who will formally introduce the head of state of Kenya, President Uhuru Kenyatta. CS Muchiru, over to you.
Thank you very much, Sid. And I think the best is to wait for His Excellency. But I can make some remarks just before he comes on. I think the call should be ending shortly. But Your Excellency, the President of the Republic of Kenya, President Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta, the Deputy Secretary General, United Nations, Ms. Amina Mohammed, Sanda Odhiambo, my friend, UN Global Compact, distinguished speakers and panelists, and the public from across the world. Thank you for honoring our invitation to join us today to look at how Kenya is rebuilding better post-COVID-19 through extensive public-private partnerships. As the Deputy Secretary General has noted, Your Excellency, your vision to champion and start the implementation of the universal healthcare as one of the core pillars of Kenya's development is at the heart of our success as a country to fight the coronavirus pandemic. Beyond healthcare, you have also continuously championed two key areas. This is the need for youth to be at the table of decision-making and development, and the role and pace of digitization and digital inclusion for future-proofing of Kenya and Africa. Your Excellency, indeed, these three vision areas of universal healthcare, the place of youth and the role of technology, coupled with support from development partners like the United Nations, country team, and private companies that are the bedrock of Kenya's success in not just fighting the pandemic, but also in ensuring that as the world implemented containment measures, we were able to generate early and quick wins against the spread of COVID-19, ensuring that our recovery as a country started at the same time as we bore all in fighting the pandemic. Your Excellency, it is my honor to welcome you to deliver the keynote address at this event and look at how we are progressing better as a country. So thank you. And I will just check if he's joined yet.
Yes, he's in the room. I know that because Patrick is in touch with me and listening to everything, but he's also on the phone at the same time. So
I'm aware.
I think, since we have you on the hot seat right now, and just as the president comes, we've just done a visit to the Silicon Valley together. And I think the Deputy Secretary General would be very interested to know, what led to it. So perhaps hearing from you as our key counterpart and as a Stanford alum yourself who has, who's really come from the Google ecosystem and then appointed as the minister to lead on innovation, technology, youth and ICT affairs. I think we should just hear from you as to what you thought of that visit and what is it that we could be doing in order to advance Kenya's development agenda. Over to you, CS.
Thank you very much, Sid. I think let me first start by thanking you and the UN for the great support that you have given, to us as a country. I think one of our, key assets is our youth, and our youth are very innovative, and they come up with a lot of innovations. They look at how to grow and scale those innovations, but without the kind of partnership that we need from more experienced, I would say, countries and companies across the world, we're not able to move as fast. And so the main reason for us visiting Silicon Valley was one, first to just meet the different businesses that are out there, introduce our businesses and see how we can partner with them in order to be able to scale and build some of the businesses that have come out of our innovations. We also went there and looked at and worked closely also with the academia. They involved in research, in ensuring that even as we look at these products, are they working well? How do we work on scaling them? And really, where do we get all the data? So some of the companies we're visiting have a lot of data on even users in Kenya. So whether it was LinkedIn who were telling us, how are people moving from jobs to jobs, from countries to countries in relation to our country. It was great to see that. Google was helping us also with their data, Facebook, and so on. So it's how we can collaborate and be able to build together. One of the key challenges that many of the companies would face is the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which required that there is a system where you have to be sure when you're making investments, how you get into the country. And so creating this SDG Accelerator Lab together allows for those companies to come with confidence, to know that companies have been vetted, institutions have been vetted, individuals have been vetted, so that we can be able to see ways of seeding capital to these businesses, being able to give them the advice that they need at board level or even at research level. So it was a great experience to be able to go together, meet these organizations, as well as go to Washington and meet the government, United States, and see how again we can partner and be able to grow this. Obviously, the pandemic came and it has slowed us a bit, but I hope that once we see the end of it, we should be able to then accelerate this process. And really, I'm grateful for the support we've had from you and the whole United Nations family, even here in Kenya. Thank you, Sid.
So Sander, in your new role now, you've actually worked, you've actually practically seen it when we worked in Mandera, Wajir, Marsabit, Lamu, Isiolo, Migori. There were 6 companies: Safaricom, Huawei, Kenya Healthcare Federation, Merck, Philips. With these 6 companies, we were actually able to bring down maternal mortality ratios by 1/3, which got us all invited to the World Economic Forum. In this new role, how do you see that we could actually amplify these relationships that we built up so that we can actually have real enduring impact in Africa, which is obviously the new consumer producer with a population which will go to 2.3 billion by 2050. Sandra, your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you, Sid. I mean, you know, at the Global Compact, what we want to really achieve with our businesses is drive forward business benefit, which is what we do through solid business practices, but also societal impact. You know, we firmly believe, you know, business really has to get involved in the business of societal transformation. So I truly agree with you, Sid. Models that you've cited from your work leading those corporates in Kenya are exactly what we would like to scale and grow and replicate through the Global Compact. I think that businesses have an immense opportunity to deliver that sort of transformation through collaborative partnerships, through their supply chains and through their value chains as well. And I think that, you know, anchoring all the interventions on the SDGs and the principles of the Compact certainly give us a strong pathway to go forward. So, you know, we look forward to, again, building on some of the successes of the partnerships you've shared. And indeed, I think for us, anchoring our work, partnering very strongly with the UN country teams would also help us drive forward the transformation we need to bring across the world.
Madam Deputy Secretary General, I know that you have a hard stop at one point. Just let us know when that hard stop is and you can go. But I think that, you know, there are many people who are online, not just here. I can already see over 300 people on this side, but I'm also talking about the large number of people who are on Facebook watching this at the moment. You have instituted some of the boldest reforms in the United Nations system, which have been ever attempted. Not easy. It's a movement forward. As we sit in this ecosystem, the COVID-19 came in as a big surprise and really put a pause on many things. How do you see your country teams now being able to become far more fit for purpose given the current context? Over to you, Madam Deputy Secretary.
Thank you very much. My hard stop is after I hear the President of Kenya. Sid, look, the truth is that we have to be humble enough to know that the UN today needs to be a collaborator, a partner. And so therefore, having the skill sets and becoming that place that we can convene and we can connect all those partnerships for scale is really what we need to be about. And I think that this is what we're doing. We're very lucky that we have the framework of the SDGs, because there is nothing in that that does not apply to a country, just perhaps the way you prioritize it, you shape it. Every time I look at country plans, I see the SDGs, and it shouldn't be the other way around, trying to fit everyone into our plans. It should be that this speaks to their plans, and by governments and people actualizing their own visions and aspirations, we get the SDGs. And I think that this is, you know, for us, it's about partnerships. It's about the economy and how inclusive it can become and who the players are in the economy. And really with government being the facilitator, institutions being there to carry the scale of this, of the services that are needed, the enabling environment, but that we need to grow our businesses and we need to grow the capacities of young people to meet those aspirations that they have. I think it's amazing that you were able to visit Silicon Valley, because you know, you can leapfrog a lot of things. We don't have to go through the same tracks. We can do that. Just the migration of the informal sector onto a digital platform, bringing them closer to the formal economy, is an amazing opportunity and a leapfrogging initiative that we're having now because of COVID. So I would say to young people, this right now, UN at 75, the way that we're reforming has to do with an intergenerational transition. It's a new era. And we're thinking cities, we're thinking young people, we're thinking technology. And so we cannot use the tools or necessarily the profiles of 1945. We need to move. And that's really what we're pushing. And, you know, change comes hard, but it's worth it. It's part of our journey. And I'm very excited. And that's why it's so important for me to have an opportunity to hear and collaborate at a country level activity. And I'm especially pleased to see Miriam Sidibe there. I haven't seen you for such a long time. And to see Ruth Kagia, who is one of the best people I can tell you, who leads on issues like education, but has brought that, I think, brought that home into providing many more skills, capacities, expertise, mindset changes, which can move you, you know, streets ahead of anyone else. And you know, so great to see Kenya leading. And I hope that they're, you know, setting the benchmark so that it's a race to the top. And you know, that's the hope, and that's the excitement that we all have.
Madam Deputy Secretary General, if you recall, when you were leading on the SDGs on behalf of the UN, you actually had Kenya and Ireland juxtaposed with you as part of the Open Working Group in advancing the SDG agenda. So I think this is such an opportune time for you to be here as we are looking at this decade of action, that it is in this very country that which provided leadership at the Open Working Group to really make sure that the SDGs came to fruition. And it's quite clear, Madam Deputy Secretary General, that SDG 3 has suddenly raised its profile and its primacy. And I think that is something that we have to be far more mindful of. And I'm just wondering, CS Micheru, that since we are talking about this whole leapfrogging of innovation and technology, and you have such a wide berth because of the innovation part, the ICT part, the youth part, I was just thinking, what is it that we could now be doing in terms of nurturing big farmers, the entire scope of public-private partnership to really have this transformative effect and impact on health? Because the traditional model has not worked. Otherwise, why have health systems across the world collapsed? Across the world, the most advanced, the most powerful countries who we thought were immune to any form of disease and disorder have actually been the ones that have been hardest hit. So just a thought in terms of, as we start to look at the COVID work, the post-COVID work, what would you want to now see us strengthen, and particularly us as the UN, to be able to better support you? Over to you, CS.
Yeah. Thank you, Sid. I think I align myself with the comments that have been made in terms of COVID has created an opportunity for us to see some of the developments and some of the skills that our young people have in being able to take a challenge. For instance, what we've seen with the pandemic, they've innovated, they've come up with ventilators. The way the borders were closed, we didn't have access to, some of these tools that were required across the world. And so we had to find ways of innovating. So we've learned that we can actually begin to produce some of these things ourselves centrally here in the country. We have learned that our young people are able to innovate. They come up with beds, they come up with, different ways, even contact tracing, they've got tools, assisting, with the many things that we need. So what we've established is that in many ways we can be able to harness these skills that they give, whereas before we thought we didn't necessarily have to use video conferencing. Now it's one of the key tools that we're using in government, which is creating a lot of efficiency for us. And in that sense, we're able to then interact with the rest of the world using technology. So what we have seen with the pandemic is that we have a lot of latent skills, and to be able to harness these skills, we need to do that across the world. And really, the idea of having these partnerships across, whether it is private sector, whether it is government, or and the United Nations, seeing how we can now harness and work together. We have moved from just where, for instance, with our hygiene program, which the president launched, where we're providing our young people with the opportunity to help us clean the cities and ensure that we have a more hygiene city. That now is one of the processes we're going to use to institutionalize, so that, whereas before we were using a lot of machinery and so on, now we've seen our young people can help us in that area, as well as all the way to the different innovations that are going on. They have, with technology, been able to help us even doing the data analysis. We've been looking at our curves, what's happening. So there are many tools and many services that we've now harnessed from our young people. And really the partnerships we can have from the UN is also all the learnings from our neighbors and the other countries. How can we put this together and ensure we get the whole continent working? We ensure we involve all the actors so that they are able to, to be able to develop and move us forward. So I think COVID has come with its health challenges, but we've seen the opportunities that have been presented. And really, I think as a country, we've been very fortunate to have so many young people that have, during this time, helped us. Thank you, Sid.
Thank you. Thank you very much, CS. Madam Deputy Secretary General, since we have a little more of your presence here, I just thought that in terms of the youth agenda, and you can see that President Kenyatta is really pushing this really from an African context too. What is it that you think that Kenya can do more in terms of advancing the entire prospect of the youth agenda? because that is a priority for you, that is a priority for the Secretary General, that is a priority for the President of this country. What is it that we could be doing more to harness that, given the fact that we are also having cross-border programs with Ethiopia and Uganda and soon want to expand it? Any advice to us as the country team and as our government partners who are all here? Over to you.
Thanks, Sid. Well, I think Kenya is teaching us lessons, and it's giving us ideas for what we say to the rest of the world. And I would just say that, you know, taking advantage of the opportunities of platforms that we are bringing in to shape future agenda, for instance, the food security systems, the food system summit that we're going to be having next year, is a really big place that young people need to be moving into shaping, because it will be about the way we consume, it'll be about the way we produce, it'll be about the context in which we do all of this. And it is more than just food, it will be nutrition, and there'll be a number of issues, it'll be business. So I think that, you know, to get in there and to help to co-chair and to shape the outcome of that summit has enormous impact on delivering on the agenda thereafter. And it's really an amazing agenda right now that we're seeing, and a lot of action coalitions that are also there. There is a youth strategy, which of course I think, you know, needs to be taken off the table. In some countries this is working, but I think the biggest ask that we would have would be that when you are succeeding the way that Kenya is and trying to bring youth along, is to allow that to catch on across all the borders, because the largest cohort that we have seen in history will be of youth will be in Africa. That's an asset, and we have to make sure it remains that. And for an asset, you need to invest, and so we need to invest in education. We need to make sure that our girls are having the equal opportunities and rights to be part of this growth. And that's education, and education is really important. I love that there is a girls coding initiative. It plans to reach 1 million. I don't know why it can't do more. So more efforts of governments themselves to make sure that coding is demystified and that everybody has it, because that's the new language, and that's the way we should be empowering young people to move forward. But, you know, youth at the table, young people who are leading, we want them to be, you know, as I say in my office, every time you find yourself with a table, ask how many young people are at that table. And if you're lucky enough to have a third of that table or half of that table with young people, ask them to chair the meeting. I mean, we really have to be putting young people in the place of understanding the responsibility and what it means, and the leadership that they're going to be expected to take if we want that intergenerational transition. So it's going to be a lot more about us acting on how we empower young people and making sure that we convene, that we create the space, that we, you know, we hand the baton and we don't hang on to it, let it go. You know, we all made our mistakes, and what we have to make sure is that we're behind them. And if they're going to sort of slightly fall back, we push them forward and they keep going. Energy, vision. So it's a number of things. Changing mindsets, using young people and especially women in areas where we need to mediate for peace. I see many crisis situations, whether they're climate-induced or conflict-induced. The future is showing that there is a light at the other end, and that hope is the pathway that we take to that. What is the bridge to peace? Who's walking across it when you get to the there, then it's not going to be sustainable. So really thinking through what that means and the kind of capacities and profiles, and, you know, they can come from everywhere, because we want to make sure that everyone's included.
Perhaps the word of George Bernard Shaw, you know, some men see things and ask why, and some dream things that never was and ask why not. And maybe we've really come to that why not moment, Madam Deputy Secretary General, and, you know, try and do things differently. And to use your words, which I love quoting, of flipping the orthodoxy, and I think that's really the way forward. You know,
well, I borrowed that from somebody else, but I do think that it explains the mindset that we need, is that don't just go, you know, out of the box. You need to go out of the ballpark. You need to really flip things and have the courage to be wrong sometimes, because out of those mistakes come great truths that we work with. And I think that the SDGs, you know, it happened on Africa's watch. The President of the General Assembly, the co-chair, myself supporting. And I think that, you know, what was even greater was the partnership that we had with the European Union. And there was a point at which Ireland was actually president for a time when we were shaping that agenda, and the role that the European Union also played. But I have to say, you know, on Africa's watch, great things happened, ambition happened, things like goal 16 and goal 17, for which I think all other 15 goals sit on. You cannot, you know, hold up those 15 without these two important pillars of institutions and partnerships.
So, Madam DSG, we realize that you have many other things which are happening. It's in the midst of the General Assembly. You made all the time for us. I'll just invite the panelists on board now and get that started. You can leave it whenever you wish to. I think, you know, I just got a message from the State House. The president is sitting in the room, and he's got the phone in his hand. So he's watching you. Just be aware of that. So, so let me just turn to the panel and invite Jane Nelson, the Director for Corporate Social Responsibility at the Harvard Kennedy School and a non-resident senior fellow at the Brookings Institution. Now, Jane has an illustrious track record on her own, and I'm delighted that we have someone of her caliber really come and bring this very illustrious panel. And what you just mentioned about the EU, actually the EU ambassador who's listening to you is Irish himself. So it's wonderful. So Jane, may I invite you to come on board, and let's get the panel going. And we will stop the panel the moment the president arrives. Jane, over to you.
Thank you, Sid, and thank you, Amina, Deputy Secretary General, for your amazing leadership and ability to bring us together across all sorts of traditional boundaries. So it's an enormous pleasure and honor to be with you all today and to serve as your moderator for our discussion on how we can build much more effective public-private partnerships to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And with our great panel today, we're going to focus on some very practical examples from both Kenya and the European Union, look at some of the challenges and lessons learned in building partnerships, and then how we can actually accelerate and scale them. And throughout our discussion, we want to sort of focus on the purpose of partnership and 4 key areas where innovative and accountable partnerships can really make a difference. First, to protect and improve people's lives, and especially their health and safety, and a reliable and affordable access to essential products and services, particularly for most vulnerable people and households. Secondly, how do we support people's livelihoods, and particularly ensure access to decent jobs and to living wage, living incomes, and particularly to support, again, the most vulnerable small micro enterprises, women, youth entrepreneurs in the informal sector, to enable them to thrive and succeed. Thirdly, how do we sustain people's learning, and particularly ensure reliable access to both reliable, data-driven, evidence-based public information, and also to education and skills development. And fourth, how do we strengthen people's long-term resilience to deal with not only the pandemic, but other major sort of systemic shocks such as climate change, economic shocks, and the digital transformation that we're seeing. So that, I think, is the purpose that we want to look at, and the reason, the raison d'etre to have partnerships around people's lives, livelihoods, learning, and access to information, and long-term resilience. And we have 4 outstanding leaders and passionate partnership practitioners to take us through some of these thoughts and ideas today. In the interest of time, I'm going to introduce them as I bring each of them in, but also would encourage many of you who are listening online, if you have questions, to share those with us, and we'll try and bring some of those in, time permitting. But so without further ado, I'd like to start with Professor Miriam Sidibe, who has just been appointed Professor for Practice at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. Miriam's also the woman behind the award-winning Global Hand Washing Day, which is now celebrated in over 100 countries. And during her time in Unilever, played a key role in building the Global Hand Washing Partnership. Miriam, you're also, apart from being a wonderful colleague, you're also the author of the best-selling book Brands on a Mission, and the chair of the National Business Compact on Coronavirus in Kenya, and a compact that you and your colleagues brought together in a very short period of time once the WHO announced that this was a pandemic. So could you start us off by sharing some of the key capabilities that you think business can bring to the table, and some of the actions you took in mobilizing the National Compact as quickly as you did?
Thank you very much, Jane. A real pleasure. I've absolutely enjoyed and continue enjoying and learning from you in terms of what it takes to really build coalition. So to be here today with you as a moderator, and of course with my my role model of forever, Amina DSG, where we first launched soap Lifebuoy in Abuja. For if she will remember, this is where we met and started really thinking at the time when we were thinking about the MDGs and not even the SDGs at that time. But you know, I think it's a really a good starting point. I think when I think about 6 months ago, the National Business Compact didn't exist. You know, from a standing start in mid-March, you know, with the first case of COVID-19 identified in Nairobi, the National Business Compact on coronavirus has brought together business and development, government and enterprise, product and communication. And I think we've all united behind what I call, and I think the title of my book also, Brands on a Mission. And in this case, I'm talking about Commercial Corona, or Stop Corona, as you would say in English. You know, the National Business Compact has been defined as a blueprint for partnerships and coalition to respond to COVID-19. But, you know, when you think about what's at the core of the response of COVID-19, we're thinking about prevention behaviors on hygiene that are needed to help flatten the curve to drive hygiene behavior change. And then what's needed in order to be able to do that is consistently targeted communication of all segments of the population. And here the soap and the hygiene companies, the communication companies, not only have the expertise, but they have a core business interest to making that happen, right? So 6 months on, I think we can be really proud of what we've achieved, but we just cannot sit on our laurels. The National Business Compact started in a conversation between me and my older brother Gitinji from AMREF, and was convened by the Marketing Society of Kenya, who brought 55 companies to the first meeting, and with the blessing of the UN family, and of course, you know, my professional home of 15 years, Unilever. You know, we were originally, you know, aiming at the SDGs as we were thinking about this, but you know, very quickly the COVID gave us the urgency and a ready-made mission to bind us all together. And as Sid talked about, and you know, as you've seen in the dynamism and the influence that he brings, you know, he also brought this undying belief that together we could be better and we could go further. And it is under all the leadership of the Kenya government that we've managed to make a real positive impact on this dreadful pandemic that has been attacking our world. You know, but I think as we talk about capabilities, I'd like to touch on something that's really important in terms of the currency that is binding us. It's trust. And then it is trust that has binded this coalition to turn it into a coalition of the willing to a coalition of the able. So congratulations again to everybody who's listening, and congratulations to our president, who has had the courage to lead the country into an unprecedented lockdown, risking livelihoods, economy, and children's learning in order to protect the nation's health. And as we think about reopening our schools in October, we have a lot to congratulate ourselves for, but complacency is not an option. Because we know COVID-19 is here to stay, and if it has taught us anything, it has taught us that we must stay prepared. And I think, you know, as you know, and anybody who knows me, you know that I've been thinking about hand washing with soap for the last 20 years. You know, I always knew it could make a difference to global health, but I never realized how important it could become obviously in 2020. And what COVID-19 has actually given us is an opportunity to re-examine our values, to look at what we're doing and why we're doing it. And it's become very clear that it is those businesses that are on a mission that are going to really stay resilient through the years. Those businesses that have suffered are the ones that, you know, and that will recover, are the ones that have dedicated themselves to helping people to buy their products, and those that are actually helping them get out of this current crisis. So just in recap, in the last 6 months, we've raised over $6 million in cash, in kind, but most importantly, in pro bono work, in really getting the best of what businesses really bring to the table. We've managed to think about blended financing in response to COVID-19, you know, through AMREF, and here I have to acknowledge the UK FCDO, Unilever finances package that allowed us to really be able to take this up, to build the model not only in Kenya, but to really take the model of national coalition to Uganda and Tanzania. We've done national media campaign across the country, reaching over 15 million people. We've equipped the country with public hand washing facilities, identified with the government that there were 7,500 hotspots that needed to be reached. Together as a coalition, we've already reached 5,400. But most importantly, we're working towards maintaining them with water and soap. We've distributed hundreds of masks and thousands of bars of soap, alongside with companies that normally would compete, from Unilever, Reckitt Benckiser, Pwani, Chandaria, Menengai, all united to respond to this crisis. So, I think it's important to stop for a minute and just think about these capabilities that you're talking about, because these achievements go much further than some of the figures we're talking about. By using communication companies like Shujaz, for example, media companies, to really target the youth and give them targeted, segmented communication that they really want to hear, you actually help millions of youth to do the very best, to strive and hustle themselves out of COVID-19, for example. And of course, today we are on a panel with some of our esteemed colleagues of the EU, of Equity Bank, AMREF, of Harvard University. But I think ultimately, what we want to do is also drive the path of sustainability of this coalition, and also take our learnings beyond these borders, and know that the challenges of long hygiene, lasting hygienes, is going to go beyond the initial reactive process that we've had. It's going to take long-term investment in infrastructure, in rethinking water bills in school, and ensuring every child has access to a hand washing facilities and soap and a mask. So everyone else, be prepared. I do have a request very soon. I hope you'll be ready to help us out. So get your checkbooks ready, but I'll tell you more about this later on.
Good. Well, thank you, Miriam, and I hope we can come back to you later in terms of some of the lessons learned. But I'd like to now bring in Dr. James Mwangi, who I hope is going to join us there. And good afternoon, James. Wonderful to have you with us. James is the Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer of Equity Group Holdings, which I think a lot of people around the world see as one of the most innovative and inclusive financial services institutions in the world. James is also chair of the Equity Group Foundation, and among many other public service roles, the chair of the Health Committee of President Kenyatta's COVID-19 Response Fund Board. So it's wonderful to have you with us, James. And James, for many years now, you've been one of a vanguard of global business leaders who has been actually implementing models that demonstrate measurable business benefit with measurable development impact. And it'd be great if you can share some of your insights and lessons learned, both within the context of the pandemic, but also beyond that, on building really effective, trusted and accountable, inclusive public-private partnerships. Over to you, James.
Thank you very much, Jane. It's true that equity for the last 25 years has been centered on a purpose-driven business. We evolved a purpose of transforming lives, giving dignity, and expanding opportunities for wealth creation. That has always been the purpose of Equity Group. And then we said, maybe we may not fulfill this purpose alone. We created a vision to champion the cause of socioeconomic transformation on Africa. And that was able to then bring on board collaborators and partners who could help us lead a scale the purpose of the bank. What the purpose enabled us to do is to ensure that our business model was people-centered. It was all about people, because it is about changing lives. It's about expanding opportunities for all. And in the process, we realized by default, we had captured in the business model the fulfillment and satisfaction of all the 17 SDGs, because whether it's gender, look, for instance, the collaboration between Equity and the UN Habitat on Fanikisha, making it possible for women. That was 12 years ago. And UN brought out the capabilities of training our staff on how we could develop products that really were central to bringing on board to financial access women who were marginalized by then. The regulation was against women and quite a lot. And essentially today we have 12 products under the Fanikisha suite of products. And we have reached about 560,000 women with loans. And we are talking about 0.7 billion US dollars in terms of funding. So that aspect of, yeah, the model is about people, is transforming lives. You don't stop transforming a person because of their gender. You don't stop transforming somebody's life because of their age. So in a parallel to the UN Equity Partnership on Women, then we focused on a partnership with MasterCard Foundation that focused on youth. And we brought in the Kenya government, and I'm glad His Excellency the President championed this. And we set ourselves an ambition of creating 5 million jobs. And I'm glad that starting last year, we've managed to create 386,000 jobs for young people. And we have saved 166 jobs that could have fallen off. So through that collaboration. So when you create a business around a purpose, then what happens is that that purpose naturally will be a social challenge to society. What we were solving was financial inclusion, but we didn't say our purpose is to bring a financial inclusion. We made the purpose the outcome of financial inclusion so that there's clarity to everybody what the measurement will be. And we measure the bank. And today, equity, 54% of all our clients are women in a world where women are marginalized. But it's because the purpose is centered on people. But I think the lessons of a purpose-driven business became very, very clear when COVID struck. COVID exposed the fragility of our society and the unsustainability of our society. It exposed what was weak with the system. And essentially we asked ourselves, under the circumstances, if we are people-centered, what should we be doing? And essentially it came straight to the board that the bank and the group should be saving lives and should be preserving livelihoods. And essentially that's how Equity ended up mobilizing $11 million and devoted that to provision of PPEs to public hospitals so that we could create a second line of defense for the entire nation, whereby, and to date, 4 months later, we still have resources for another 14 months to sustain that provision of everything that is required by doctors, nurses, clinical officers for 18 months. And essentially, then we realized that was the second line of defense. We asked ourselves, what would we do for the first line of defense? And we converted our staff as trainers to our 14 million customers on how to deal and cope with COVID and demystify COVID. We triggered the 30 doctors under the Equity Afia franchise to train our staff as trainers and they became then the trainers of, and we have seen that mutual, and we are glad that we could make that contribution. But we said that is all about saving lives. What about livelihoods? And the bank committed to analyze all the sectors of the economy that were affected and all the customers who had businesses which had loans and their sectors were affected. We offered them a blanket cover of loan moratorium of up to 4 years. So if you're in a sector like aviation, travel, hotel, real estate, where we expected it to take up to 4 years to recover, you were given a loan repayment for up to 4 years so that we don't destroy the business that provides livelihood, not just to the owner, but to employees and the larger society in which it operates in. And to date, we have rescheduled 45% of all our entire loans. and given everybody a break based on what? And the bank had to go global, and to fill in the gap of cash flow, we borrowed 500 million US dollar long-term loans to fill in the gap of the rescheduled loans because of cash flow. And then we fortified the rescheduled loans with a credit guarantee to back in case of prolonged absence of repayment in the default. So you could see the mindset is fully informed by the purpose. That is not banking. Banking is about managing risk, but our risk was about livelihoods. Our risk was about lives. It was not a risk about loans, repayment, and the rest and the rest. So purpose can be very powerful. However, for a purpose to be very effective, it has to be embedded on the business model. If you look at equity, we have pushed an inclusive business model. At the very bottom are refugees and social safety net beneficiaries. We have up to 3 million clients across the group that have come and have been assigned accounts so as to receive social payments. Then the next layer is retail banking, and on until supreme high net worth individual. That segmentation is essential to ensure nobody is left behind. If our business is to empower and extend opportunities to all, then you need to bring them on the table where resources are being allocated. So the essence of a business model is very important. And that is what creates the resilience and then makes the model very. And then the last one is that then you have to really have an organizational culture that is appropriate and aligned to the business model. If you look at equity, our tagline is growing together in trust. So you can see in our purpose, trust is everything. You can't transform people's lives. You can't save livelihoods if then there isn't trust. You can't give somebody a loan repayment break of 4 years if they are not trust. You still believe that customer is genuine, they are sincere, and once their business recover, they will come back to repay their loans. So essentially alignment of values, the organization values, the organizational culture, the business model, then creates that possible platform. However, there is also recognition that purpose are bigger than business model. So hence the need for collaboration and partnerships. And when there's an opportunity, we can talk how we have used partnerships to scale what the business model could never have been able to achieve. Today, Equity Group Foundation is bigger than Equity Bank in terms of impact. And essentially, it is 2% of the total revenue of the banking group, but the bulk of money comes from like-minded partners like MasterCard, Kenya government, UNDP, UN agencies, the World Bank, and everybody else who wants to further that purpose. So there is alignment.
Great. No, well, thank you so much for those wonderful examples, James. And I think sort of 3 sort of key messages: this incredible power of a compelling, ambitious corporate purpose and set of values. As you said, it goes way beyond the business model, but the company's broad mission and role in society, and then combining that with bringing all your capabilities to work, your banking capabilities, your technology platforms, your people, both in their day-to-day jobs, their volunteering work, your partnerships. And unless you can combine that purpose with the implementation capabilities and the business model, you're not going to get the results, and you're not going to build the trust. And the trust.
And more important, the brand of the organization. We have realized that because the brand is a financial trusted brand, it opens a lot of doors for collaboration. Absolutely. They are collaborating with a trusted brand.
Absolutely. And
that explains why the foundation is as big as the corporate itself.
Yeah. No, great. And I think going back to Miriam's comments, it was trusted relationships that enabled the Kenyan business community with the government and civil society to mobilize the National Compact as quickly as you did. So that sort of trust at the core of our relationship. So thank you. And a good point to bring in Ambassador Simon Mordew, who is the European Union's ambassador to Kenya. And I know, Simon, you have over sort of 25 years of experience working in various European Union institutions, and most recently as Deputy Director General for Migration. And you've been a very, again, long-standing sort of champion of multi-stakeholder partnerships. And it would be great to get your views from the EU perspective on how the EU is embracing these partnerships to help achieve the SDGs.
Thank you very much, Jane, and good evening to everybody. In a way, I actually do feel quite well placed to speak to this topic, because it's very much within the DNA of the European Union to work with multiple stakeholders, partly because we're a union of 27 member states. If you allow me, let me just say a couple of words on the global level, picking up perhaps on some of the points that the Deputy Secretary General Amina made in her, as always, compelling presentation. Because I think one thing we have seen as the European Union recently is that the UN reform is making a huge difference in giving space to encourage, incentivize multi-stakeholder partnerships. I mean, I've seen this on the ground in Kenya. It's chalk and cheese what we're seeing now compared to pre the reforms. Now, I hope Sid's not listening, because I would say some of this is certainly due to Sid and his dynamic personality. But the whole reform is bringing the UN agencies together to work in an integrated manner. It makes it much easier for a key donor like the European Union to do so. And with Sid and with the government, we're working now to advance the concept of an integrated national financial framework, which will bring a kind of three-dimensional approach to systematize this kind of multi-stakeholder partnership in everything we do to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. So I really think the Deputy Secretary General can be incredibly proud of the impact, perhaps indirectly, her work and the UN reforms have had on and incentivizing this approach. I could talk for a long time on many, many different examples, but let me be brief. And I thought perhaps what I could do is take the example of COVID-19 to share with you a bit how we approach this as an example of how we've tried as the European Union to embrace multi-stakeholder partnerships to make a real difference on the ground. I mean, COVID-19 hit us all by surprise. I think it's clearly demonstrated that in an interconnected world, we face global challenges that need global solutions. This is the time for multilateralism. It's not the time for a retreat into unilateralism. And this came out as well in the Kenyan context, also in the remarkably successful heads of state of the African and Caribbean and Pacific countries that the President Kenyatta, His Excellency, chaired just before the year end, where this was the emerging theme. We're stronger together. The right response now is to enhance multilateralism and cooperate more. And I think we've seen with COVID-19 that this is true, but we've equally seen it with many, many other challenges. And Miriam spoke a bit about this, we face as humanity challenges in the climate change world, in the loss of biodiversity, how to eradicate poverty, how to ensure an equal world for us all. So let's not just try and recover to where we were, but let's now make an effort to try and recover better, greener, and draw lessons from the experience we've all been through. Now, we embrace these challenges as the European Union, and this is what we've tried to do in rolling out under incredible political and time pressure an almost unprecedented response to the COVID-19 crisis here in Kenya. And it required imagination and courage, including also from the Kenyan government, who rolled up their sleeves, really engaged with us in a reprioritization exercise, looking ruthlessly at ongoing projects, moving some to a couple of years' time down the line. And we were able to mobilize a package of around 300 million euro from the European Union, equally mobilizing at the same time our 19 member states present here in Kenya in a Team Europe approach. And this has covered so many different areas: health, social safety cash transfers, safe trade, access to finance for small and medium enterprises, and direct support to the government of Kenya, all done in the closest of dialogues with the government at all levels, including actually the president, who took a personal interest in some of these and actually wanted assurances on some of what we were doing and slight nuances to fit completely with the national COVID plan. So it's involved direct support to the government, a small injection into the budget. It's involved working hand in hand with civil society. We've had a great partnership with the Kenyan Red Cross and AMREF, and I think Gitinji will tell you a bit about that in a few moments. But we've also done some really quite innovative things. One of the things I was the proudest was a partnership with Safaricom to roll out direct M-Pesa cash transfers to 80,000 people in the informal settlements in Nairobi and elsewhere. And this brought together not just the EU, not just Safaricom, but we had France, Denmark, Ireland, Oxfam, and a consortium of CSOs. It was done in absolute full coordination with existing government initiatives. And this was a point that was really important for the president, like Nyumba Kumi, the Inua Jamii. And it was done in full coordination with the Ministry of Labour and Social Protection in a way that also meant there was space for other partners to come in without duplication and without creating perhaps a negative impact on national schemes. We also did a hugely ambitious programme to try and keep safe trade, sharing with the government and with the East African community our experience as the world's largest trading area on how to keep goods flowing while also protecting personal safety. This also made sure that essential medicines, protective equipment, medical equipment could safely flow through borders and reach where it was needed most. And I was fascinated to hear James, the CEO of Equity Bank, talking, because one of our other points was to look at the challenges that the small and medium-sized businesses faced in particular. So we've mobilized with the European Investment Bank some 200 million euro of credit lines without the need for a sovereign guarantee, so not affecting the tight fiscal space. And James's bank, Equity, be one of our key partners as we roll this out to tide over SMEs in these difficult times. So I would say in conclusion that under really a very strong leadership of the government, which is indispensable and was present, the EU and its member states, hand in hand with the UN, civil society and the private sector, have been able to respond to a crisis unlike I think many of us have seen in our lifetimes. And the lesson learned now is, what have we done that has allowed us to respond so swiftly so that we can take this experience and respond to many of the other challenges we face in our lifetime. It also involved, and this is my last word, use of digital technology. And I think this is fascinating to hear what we were discussing with Miriam and others at the beginning. We supported the judiciary, for example, in the rollout of virtual technology to allow courts to continue to operate remotely. And there are things, I think, in this crisis that we'll see taken forward and will begin the norm, but have its origins in this multi-stakeholder, multi-dimensional response. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. And I would like to come back in sort of our second round to focus in, specifically on some of the lessons learned, that can be applied. But I think the theme that's coming through very, very strongly from all of you is this, government leadership at the center and presidential leadership at the center, and whether it's business, civil society, or other partners, you're working within a national shared framework. And a national vision, which I think is a very compelling story that is coming from Kenya at the moment. And with that, it's my great pleasure to bring in Gitinji Katahi, who is the global CEO of AMREF Health Africa, which is the sort of largest African-led international organization on the continent, bringing health services to well over sort of 11 million people in 35 different countries on the continent. And Gitinji, you have also, you're chair of the Universal Health Coverage 2030 working group that the World Bank and World Health Organization has set up. And through your career, both in business and in civil society, you've been a passionate and continue to be a passionate advocate for universal health coverage and access to reliable and affordable health services. And so I'd love to hear from your perspective, sort of some of the challenges you face, particularly in the context of the pandemic, and how you and your colleagues have engaged in partnerships.
Thank you very, very much. First, I would like to acknowledge, all the great speakers here and Her Excellency Amina and all my colleagues here. But I'd like to say that one of the things which I must state here is that the Kenya government has been extremely open to partnerships. When we went to the government, with Miriam to say we want to start the NBCC, the government was at hand to come along, and the Minister of Health assigned a senior government person, that's a cabinet assistant administrative secretary, to actually come and engage with us as we're launching the coalition. And beyond that, the government actually established what we call the National Task Force, which is one of the ones, I look across the African continent and I see that the collaboration between civil society and development partners and government and private sector on the response to COVID and sustained up to now has been one that is an exemplar for other countries. We have had weekly, bi-weekly or whatever number of meetings with the government leading that up to now. So I must mention that as a major example of government leadership in the response and opening the space for multi-stakeholder partnership. But the question you ask on the challenges we've seen, the challenges we see right now with COVID are building on existing health system vulnerabilities that I would like to reflect on just about 3 of them. The first reflection is that health remains the most fundamental human right, without which individuals cannot enjoy any of the other rights, whether they are civil and political rights or even other social and economic rights. If you don't have health, then it's a ground zero for moving forward. The next thing I would like to reflect on is that health in its completeness, including mental well-being and nutrition, is the basis for human capital. It is the basis for the group that James Mwangi has built around equity, because if you don't have human capital, you cannot have sustainable businesses. It is therefore a recognition of everyone that without health, then children cannot learn and adults cannot earn, which then brings everyone together to say that health is everyone's business. So we've talked about health policy, but we also talked about health in all policy, which speaks to this more approach to health and to the pandemic itself. However, we found many challenges, and some of these challenges have to do, for example, with financing and fiscal space. That whenever we are talking about the health system or even the response, to this pandemic, we've seen that the fact that low and middle income countries don't have adequate financing in healthcare, where out-of-pocket expenditure ranges from 30 to 70% in some of the countries, and government expenditure in that is about maybe only 30% across many of the African countries. We see that there is a dual challenge, one of low fiscal space, which is now even smaller because of COVID, of course, because the majority of our population, and James has reflected a lot on this, and I know the bank very clearly, and I know that the bank started off by mobilizing informal sector capital into the, and banking that banked. And this population has remained very difficult to tax because of obviously of also lack of predictability of income and, all these challenges. And this fiscal space is also reflected in low investments in healthcare. And the other one is, of course, the normal one we talk about, which is low budget allocation, with many countries allocating around 7% of their total budget expenditure to health, whereas our target should be about 15% of that, or close at 5% of the GDP, or indeed, if you had to look for an absolute number, a minimum of about $100 per capita. Right now, a country like Kenya, which is probably one of the best countries in terms of allocation in sub-Saharan Africa out of South Africa, would be putting in about $45 per capita. So from the public money, which means we have a long way to go. The other challenge I see is that even within these limited resources in the health sector and also in the pandemic response, we have an unusual friendship with healthcare rather than with health. Our friendship is tighter with healthcare and infrastructure rather than with health itself. And whereas we see health facilities as the center of gravity for health, we need to remember that communities have the capacity to create the health they need, and therefore the need to actually look at primary healthcare as the foundation for achieving universal health coverage, which, by the way, Jane, is going to be the foundation of a strong, resilient health system for this pandemic and future pandemics as well. And looking at that framework of primary healthcare in 3 areas. 1, empowered communities who are engaged. Secondly, integrated primary healthcare, which has 2 components. 1, not only primary care, but public health. We've seen the challenge that we saw in the pandemic is that the public health, because we haven't invested a lot in public health, we've invested more in primary care. We saw the challenges that we have seen in the response to the pandemic. And finally, the third part of that primary healthcare is multi-sectoral policy and action, which is actually what we are talking about, bringing multiple stakeholders who are coming from different areas. Within the NBCC, we brought in nutrition, agriculture, we brought water, we brought education, we brought all these people. But as I come towards the end of my presentation, is to say that partnerships, whatever partnerships we put together, must be seen as partnerships for public purpose. And I think that's what I've had a lot of the speakers respond to, that every partnership, as we talk about PPP, public-private partnership, or whatever we talk about, we must reframe this to mean partnerships for public purpose, because it therefore means that whatever we bring on the table in NBCC, when we are working with the EU that brought money to AMREF to look at the cultural context of the response and put that money in, and His Excellency Ambassador Simon has reflected on this, we must look at everything as partnerships for public purpose, but built on a foundation of trust capital. So the final point I want to talk about is therefore that if you're going to have a partnership for public purpose, then to mean that it is about people. And if it is about people, then we, all of us, individually as government, private sector, and civil society, are then accountable and answerable to the people for whose purpose we live. If we do not bring people to the center of our accountability, then it means that we are not driving partnerships for public purpose. So social accountability becomes really central to everything we are doing. So we've seen in some of these partnerships we are building that civil society must be at the center, not only to reflect the values and the purpose of the people and to ensure that those values are met every day, but also to hold the partnership accountable, and also in many ways to be the trust broker between the partnership and the people. That's the role international NGOs play, but most importantly, local NGOs, that we must not see civil society as AMREF Health Africa. We must see it as also the local community-based organizations that actually are the real reflection of people and of civil accountability, which you all reflect as we talk about partnerships for public purpose. I'll stop there and we can have further conversations around what are these pillars of social accountability that we must reflect on. Thank you. Thank you.
In fact, I'd like to keep on that theme of social accountability, because it is so central, I think, to building the trust and the license to continue to build partnerships. And I see we've had one question about engaging sort of women's organizations. You talk about your local civil society organizations in general. So maybe Simon, I'm sorry, Simon, I'll continue first, and then probably coming back to Miriam. Can you just sort of share some of the very practical mechanisms you're using to engage local civil society organizations, local business associations, and so it's not just the international association. So Katinji, if we could start with you and then come to Miriam, and then Simon and James.
Thank you very much, Jane, because I, as a civil society leader, believe strongly that we have international NGOs and then we have civil society, and the civil society is the people. And I believe the reason that the civil society is so critical is because the only person the government reports to is its people. The government does not report to the UN, does not report to WHO. The government reports to its people, and all these other structures and architecture assist the government to actually drive a people-driven agenda in terms of collaborating, shared learning, and all these kinds of things. So what are we doing? The first thing you find when you're talking about local civil society is that you must deliberately and intentionally engage meaningfully. You must look out for them because they will not always be on the table. The day that I called Miriam and said, hey, why is it that sanitizers are flying off the supermarket faster than soap? You as a global hand washing leader should drive a hand washing agenda based on soap. So when we started to talk about that, there were no local organizations on the table. So we had to go out as NBCC and look for them. That's number one. You have to intentionally go to the ground and look for them, which is why organizations like ours are important, because we are connected to them. Secondly is capacity, that they do not have capacity to engage. So if you're going to expect that you're going to use Zoom for your meeting every week and they're going to be available to come and attend, then you're going to be not to be able to engage with them, because where they are, there may be no Zoom, there may be no internet. So you also have to build their capacity, provide the platforms for communication yourself, and reach out to them and build their capacity so that they are able to participate. The final thing that I want to mention on that is there's something called context and cultural appropriateness, that often when we get together on these platforms, we expect that the language you speak, which is the UN agenda, which is the SDG agenda, where we meet together at the UN General Assembly, and when I meet for dinner with my friend Sid and we talk about sustainable development goals, that this language must be brought down to be context specific and to be culturally appropriate. If you're going to engage local community-based organizations, you must speak their language for them to be effective partners in the partnership.
No, thank you. But both effective partners and to be accountable to them. So thank you. And Miriam, do you want to sort of share your reflections on how we build this trust and social accountability and achieve a genuinely people-centered approach?
No, I think it's look, Jane, I mean, I've experienced and I've done my career mostly in the private sector, right? So I spent 15 years in Unilever, driving the world's largest hand washing program. And I think I keep going back to how do you make, our approach is very people-centric. But then I'm going to step into what makes people-centric when you're looking at it from a private sector perspective. Because I think it goes back to the sustainability of some of these initiatives. Because I think in order to be able to drive a real implementation that is going to keep making sure that you're driving the large part of the population, you need to make sure that it's embedded into the business model. And I couldn't echo more what James Mwangi has already talked about. Because in a time like now, making sure that we keep our businesses resilient is going to be absolutely critical if you want to keep thinking about the population that you're serving as well. Because making sure that you have the right formats available, affordable to every corner of Kenya is absolutely critical if you want to catch and fight the pandemic properly. So, I mentioned very quickly about, please bring your checkbook out, but because I knew that would make people sit up and worry about their checkbooks. But most importantly, what I wanted to say is bring your contact books and bring a leap of faith and bring your skills and expertise to the table, because that is where you start the conversation to be able to really bring it back to inside these corporations. There are people, and these people mandates are to